Welcome to the 32nd Psalm. This is Simon Barrios, and today we are going to go over Spirits 101. This will be a generalized overview of the most popular classes of spirits and some of their uses and their means of production. So let's start by talking about fermentation. So, yeast eats sugar, and the byproducts of the yeast eating that sugar to live are alcohol, carbon dioxide, and heat. When we talk about fermented and distilled beverages, we name them after the source of sugar used to create the base alcohol, such as cereal grains ferment into beer, fruit juice ferments into wine. Distillation is the process of heating a fermented beverage to separate the alcohol from the rest of the liquid. When a fermented beverage is distilled, we name them after the source of sugar used to create the base alcohol. So cereal grains become whiskey, fruit juice becomes brandy, sugarcane juice and molasses become rum, agave nectar becomes tequila or mezcal, and vodka can be made from anything. More on that to follow. The image here is fermenting corn mash, eventually becoming bourbon. So, distillation is the process of heating and separating the alcohol from the fermented base. A still is the piece of equipment used in this process. There are several types. Pot stills are often used for smaller production spirits. Column stills are used for higher volume production. The fermented base is heated until the alcohol becomes vapor. That vapor is then cooled until it is condensed onto liquid alcohol. Now, this is possible because the evaporation point of alcohol is lower than the evaporation point of water. So you heat it up, and before the water ever turns to steam, the alcohol turns into alcohol vapor, and then you can separate that from the rest of your bubbling liquids, cool it off, and capture. When that becomes liquid again, you capture that, and now you have liquid alcohol. So let's begin with vodka. So the definition of vodka. Vodka can be distilled from any base material. Traditionally, rye, wheat, and potato were used, but grapes and corn have become an important part of vodka production. Vodka must be distilled to 190 proof. This equals 95% alcohol. Distilling to this high level of alcohol strips the flavors and aromas associated with the base material used. The legal definition also includes neutral spirits distilled or treated after distillation with charcoal or other materials so as to be without distinctive character, aroma, taste, or color. Rye vodkas are spicy and crisp. Potato vodkas are smooth and creamy. Wheat vodkas are smooth and rich. Grape vodkas are fruity and smooth. And corn vodkas are smooth and rich. Some of the ways that we consume vodka would be to add anything. In a martini, we add soda, Bloody Marys, Moscow Mules, White Russians, Black Russians. Many of our favorite cocktails are made with vodka as their base spirit. So let's move on to gin. So spirits, gin is defined as spirits with a main characteristic flavor derived from juniper berries. Production by distillation or mixing of spirits with juniper berries and other aromatics or extracts derived from these materials and bottled at not less than 40% alcohol by volume or 80 proof. Most gins are made with neutral spirits, like a high proof vodka, and styles of gin include the London Dry Gin, which is a high juniper flavor and dry finish. Versions of those would be Tanqueray, Bombay, and Nolet's. The Old Tom Gin, which is sweeter than dry gin and often barrel rested. Genever, which is a gin that uses a malt whiskey as its base spirit. They are occasionally barrel aged, but what we're really talking about here is clear malt whiskey, then infused with the flavors of juniper. That gives you that pronounced flavor of the malt whiskey, as well as all of the wonderful botanicals that you use to flavor it. And then there is the Plymouth, which is drier and more citrusy than London, but there's only one producer of that style of gin. So three of the legal categories for gin. And you'll notice here on the right-hand side, there's a white box with lettering. Those white boxes you will find throughout the presentation and were copied directly from the TTB website. The TTB is the government agency in charge of regulating alcohol labeling and production. So the distilled gin is gin produced by original distillation from mash with or over juniper berries and other aromatics or their extracts, essences, or flavors. A redistilled gin is gin produced by redistillation of distilled spirits with or over juniper berries and other aromatics or their extracts, essences, or flavors. And a compounded gin is gin produced by mixing neutral spirits with juniper berries and other aromatics or their extracts, essences, or flavors. All right, we're going to talk about malt a little bit later on as well. Now, rum is made from sugarcane juice or molasses, which is a byproduct of sugar production from sugarcane. So actually, when they're making sugar, they evaporate sugarcane juice in large kettles, and the molasses is literally the gooey, caramelized, dark stickiness that is stuck to the sides of the barrels that they use to cook down the sugarcane water, sugarcane syrup. It's delicious in baking, and obviously it makes delicious rum. Okay, so rum is also defined as spirits distilled from the fermented juice of sugarcane, sugarcane syrup, sugarcane molasses, or other sugarcane byproducts at less than 95% alcohol by volume, 190 proof, having the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to rum and bottled at no less than 40% alcohol by volume or 80 proof. I want to point out here that the definition here says that it's spirits distilled from the fermented juice of sugarcane, etc., at less than 95% alcohol by volume, which is different from vodka. Because remember, vodka is 95% alcohol by volume or higher. Okay, now that's a very clear distinction there, because when you're distilling to 190 proof or 95% alcohol or lower, you're leaving the flavor of the original base material in the final product. When you go 190 or 95% alcohol or higher, you're stripping out most of the flavors and characteristics of that base spirit. You'll see this with when we talk about bourbon later on, that are legally distilled to an even lower amount. Okay. So rum is produced all over the world, and most countries have their own rules regarding additives and barrel aging. So for example, white rums or unaged rums, they often are used as the base for spice or flavored rums. Dark or black rums, these are rums aged in charred barrels for long periods. Aged rum, rum aged in wood barrels, often use bourbon or sherry barrels, often labeled by how long the rum has been aged. Sugarcane rum. Rum is made from sugarcane, not molasses. So examples of this would be cachaça from Brazil, rum agricole from Martinique, Charanda rum from Mexico. Is great examples of rum made directly from pressed sugarcane juice. They're rare but delicious. All right, so let's move on to bourbon. Bourbon is a whiskey. Whiskey is defined as spirits distilled from a fermented mash of grain at less than 95% alcohol by volume, 190 proof, having the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to whiskey, and bottled at not less than 40% alcohol by volume or 80 proof. What makes bourbon unique is defined as whiskey produced in the U.S. at not exceeding 80% alcohol by volume, or 160 proof, from a fermented mash of not less than 51% corn and stored at not more than 62.5% alcohol by volume, or 125 proof, in charred new oak containers. So bourbon was either named for Bourbon County, Kentucky, or Bourbon Street in New Orleans. That is a subject of debate, although most historians agree that it was named after the Bourbon Street in New Orleans and not after Bourbon County in Kentucky. Types of bourbon include wheater or wheated bourbon, meaning it contains more wheat than rye or other grains, but is still 51% minimum corn. High rye bourbon, meaning that they have more rye than any other grain, but still 51% minimum corn. And then straight bourbon is aged a minimum of 2 years, and if blended, all the bourbon included must be made in the same state. Now, most high quality bourbon producers are distilling their bourbon to much less than 190. Quite often, they're coming off the still in the 150s or slightly higher. Just a word of note on that. Some of the ways that we enjoy bourbon is in Manhattans, old fashions, bourbon sours. We add cola, we drink them neat, or we drink them on the rocks. Scotch. So Scotch is a whiskey, just like bourbon. And whiskey is defined as spirits distilled from a fermented mash of grain at less than 95% alcohol by volume, 190 proof, having the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to whiskey, and bottled at not less than 40% alcohol by volume or 80 proof. What makes Scotch unique is defined as Scotch whiskey being an unblended whiskey manufactured in Scotland in compliance with the laws of the United Kingdom. And then the blended Scotch whiskey is a blend of whiskeys manufactured in Scotland in compliance with the laws of the United Kingdom. Okay, so we have different types of single malt scotches. We have, or different types of scotches, including the single malt. This is made from malted barley distilled twice and in pot stills. Blended Scotch is a blend of single malt, grain whiskey, and whiskey made from other grains like wheat, rye, and corn, etc. UCF Scotches are unchill filtered. NCA Scotches are no caramel added. Speyside whiskeys, if you look at the map here on the right of the screen, you see the area of Speyside in orange. These taste spicy, slightly grassy. Lowland and Campbelltown whiskeys, which are the gray and blue, are considered lighter and softer style whiskeys. The Highland whiskeys are complex and full-bodied. That's our area there in green. And then the Islay, the tiny little area in brown, which are the very smoky with hints of iodine style whiskeys. Now, some of the ways we drink Scotch is neat or on the rocks, or we add soda, or we add water, and of course there are some famous Scotch cocktails as well. I want to talk about the differences and similarities between the rules of Scotch and bourbon for just a second. So, of course, bourbon has to come from the United States. You could go to Canada, you could go to Mexico, and use the exact same processes, okay? But the end result might be similar to bourbon, but could not legally be called bourbon. It has to be made in the United States. And even within the United States and in other countries, there are whiskeys that follow all of the rules of bourbon except for using a brand new charred white oak American barrel. They use used barrels, and therefore they cannot call themselves a bourbon either, even if they're made in the United States. If they were made in the United States, they'd just be called a corn whiskey. And I've had whiskeys made like bourbon that were made in Japan that obviously could not be called bourbon, as well as South Africa that cannot be called bourbon, and Mexico cannot be called bourbon, but made just like bourbon. And the same thing goes with Scotch. So there are single malt whiskeys made all over the world, including delicious ones from the United States, but they can't be called Scotch because they're not from Scotland. All right, let's move on to Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey is a whiskey. Whiskey is defined as spirits distilled from fermented mash of grain at less than 95% alcohol by volume, having the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to whiskey, and bottled at not less than 40% alcohol by volume. So the TTB defines the Irish whiskey in more detail as an unblended whiskey manufactured in the Republic of Ireland or in Northern Ireland in compliance with their laws. And the blended Irish whiskey, or Irish whiskey a blend, is a blend of whiskeys manufactured in the Republic of Ireland or in Northern Ireland in compliance with their laws. All right, so some of the things you'd like to know or should know about Irish whiskey is that they are made from malted and unmalted barley. Grain whiskey can also be used in the blends. They're distilled 3 times Traditionally, whereas Scotches are distilled twice, they're often aged in used bourbon barrels. That's very common. And there are many more small distilleries in Ireland, but these are the big ones on the map that I have provided here. And obviously, these are the names that you're familiar with, plus a couple more. All right, let's move on to tequila. So, tequila, we make margaritas, we drink them as shots, we drink them neat, we drink them on the rocks, and also the Paloma cocktail has been very popular for the last few years. This has been defined as spirits distilled in Mexico in compliance with the laws and regulations of the Mexican government from a fermented mash derived principally from the agave tequiliana Weber blue variety. So the blue agave. This is the only agave you can use to make tequila. There are hundreds of other types of agaves, but this is the only one allowed in tequila production. With or without additional fermentable substances, having the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to tequila, and bottled at not less than 40% alcohol by volume. Types of tequila include the Blanco, meaning white or silver. This is tequila which has no additives allowed, and it may be aged in a barrel for up to 2 months, but does not have to. Now, quite often when a distiller in tequila decides to put a Blanco in a barrel, they're using very, very old barrels. So those barrels are not going to impart a lot of color and only a small amount of flavor and aroma. Usually that's done for texture or also just to hold on to the tequila so it has an opportunity to oxidize for a short period of time before it goes into the bottle. The next type of tequila would be the reposado, which means rested tequila. This is aged in barrel for 2 to 12 months. Typically, used bourbon barrels are used. Typically, you will also find cognac, rum barrels, sherry barrels being used, especially by some of the more creative and unique style of tequila producers. Extra añejo añejo means aged, and it's aged for 12 to 36 months in barrels. Again, typically used bourbon barrels. Extra añejo is aged for 36 months or more. Cristalino tequila is tequila that has been aged and then filtered to remove color and some flavor from the barrels. So quite often they will take an añejo tequila and then they will strip all of the color out of it. So you get some of the texture, some of the aroma, and some of the flavor, but without the darkness that you expect in a extra añejo, or reposado tequila. And then there is the category of joven tequilas, which means young or youthful. And this is a tequila that does not comply with the above categories, such as Blanco blended with añejo, quite often Blanco blended with extra añejo. So you won't see a lot of these in the market, but they're quite often luxury tequilas, very high priced, very delicious, and very sought after. Now, there's another category of tequila called the mixto, and gold tequilas are part of this category. Now, this is a tequila that is 51% agave blended with neutral spirits plus artificial color or flavor, such as oak extract, syrup, glycerin, and caramel color. Now, these 4 additives are also allowed in reposado and older tequilas, but not in Blanco. So the government says that the government agency that governs tequila in Mexico, they say that those are the 4 things that can be added: oak extract, syrup to make them slightly sweeter, glycerin, which makes them smoother, and then the caramel color to make them darker, like a whiskey. This is basically a way to take the tequila and make it a darker brown, so it looks like it's been very well aged in a wood barrel. Now, I want to make a note here about how it is 51% agave blended with neutral spirits. Those neutral spirits are quite often rum. So it's like a neutral rum. So a rum that's been distilled for over 190 proof, so that when it's blended with the agave, you don't really taste that. What you taste is the agave. And then in these mixtos, they do have other artificial flavors and colors that are legally allowed. but aren't worth going over. And then we're going to finish up with brandy. So some of the ways we consume brandy would be old-fashioned with cola, neat in a snifter. And brandy is defined as spirits distilled from the fermented juice, mash, or wine of fruit, or from its residue at less than 95% alcohol by volume, 190 proof, having the taste, aroma, and characteristics generally attributed to brandy and bottled at not less than 40% alcohol by volume, or 80 proof. So some of the types of brandy, Cognac is a grape brandy from the region of Cognac, France. Armagnac is a grape brandy from the region of Armagnac, France. Apple brandy is made from apples. Calvados is apple brandy from the Calvados region of France, which is in Normandy. Pisco is a grape brandy from Peru that is not aged in wood containers. Slivovitz is a plum brandy, also a very commonly consumed form of brandy around the world. Well, that does it for this general overview. We are going to put this onto our YouTube channel. Feel free to ask questions beneath it. And I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you very much.